Alright, Joseph Pulitzer. It's who it's on. It's gonna be weird, because I've never sung a song, rapped to a song either. Oh well, bear with me. This is for you, Miss Richmond! Joseph Pulitzer was born in Moscow, Hungary. After his father died, he wasn't happy as could be. His mom married another man, and that's the way it stayed. After they moved to Budapest, Joseph studied all day. He worked real hard and learned 3 languages too. I can't think of anything that rhymes with that, so here's a purple shoe. German, French, Hungarian. He all spoke. His English wasn't great, but that he later wrote. Despite all of the studies, boredom is not what he sought. Joseph sought adventure. Well, that's what he got. A military life was the thing for him. He really liked battle, and he loved to win. His eyesight was awful. He was rejected a lot. Napoleon, Austria, and Britain left him to rot. A Civil War recruiter seemed to be Joseph's last chance. He volunteered fast without a sideways glance. The recruiter got Joseph's money for drafting. Joseph didn't think the recruiter should have gotten the money since he enlisted, not the recruiter. So Joseph jumped off the ship right before it hit the American coast and swam to shore in his clothes, enlisted by himself, and got the money he deserved. Lincoln's first cavalry was the group that Joseph picked. Carl Schurz was his commander, being smart, strong, and quick. At the local library, Joseph refined his English smarts. He also studied law, all of the many parts. Joseph wouldn't find a job that he liked until much later. He tried bookkeeper, mule tender, and even restaurant waiter. Eventually, Joseph got hired by Carl Schurz to be a reporter for the Westliche Post, a small German-English newspaper. Joseph had journalistic talent and worked hard and fast. Joseph's political views underwent a major change around this time. He used to be a liberal Republican, but that all changed because Horace Greeley. Horace Greeley was the liberal Republican candidate for president and got lots of support from Joseph Pulitzer. However, Pulitzer was badly beaten during the presidential race. From then on, Joseph was a staunch Democrat. As a Democrat, Joseph had a lot of political duties, including delegate to the Democratic National Convention and congressman, which he resigned from after a year so that he could focus on his newspaper. Wow, that didn't rhyme at all. Oh well, I'll keep going. Rapping wasn't my forte. Never has been, never will be. Eventually, Joseph sold his Westliche Post interest and bought the St. Louis Post and St. Louis Dispatch. He merged them as the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Way to be creative. It started out really small, just a local newspaper. However, Joseph built it up to be huge, and when he had accumulated enough money, he bought yet another newspaper that he would make glorious: the New York World. His purpose for the newspaper can be summed up in his own words: "We will always fight for progress and reform, never tolerate injustice or corruption, always fight demagogues of all parties, always oppose privileged classes and public plunderers, never lack sympathy with the poor, always remain devoted to the public welfare, never be satisfied with merely printing news, always be drastically independent, never be afraid to attack wrong, whether by predatory plutocracy or predatory poverty." Pulitzer wrote extensively about the evils of monopolies and the danger an exclusive upper class posed to Americans. He advocated for a taxing of luxuries, inheritances, and pretty much anything that involved unfairly large amounts of wealth. He also really wanted to graduate income tax and wrote about it extensively in his paper. Oops. France had a gift for America: the Statue of Liberty. It was made to be a symbol of freedom that would welcome all the immigrants. For the population of the US had nearly doubled in the last 30 years due to massive immigration from the south and east of Europe. It was to symbol France's friendship that they had made with America during the American Revolution. There was only one problem: they didn't have a pedestal. Because of this, the statue was just waiting to be erected outside of New York. However, Pulitzer raised major awareness in his paper, receiving enough donations for there to be a pedestal. The statue was inaugurated in 1876, 100 years after the American Revolution. Another thing that Joseph Pulitzer did to make his paper shine was he used investigative journalism. Nellie Bly was one of the first investigative journalists, as well as one of Joseph Pulitzer's biggest publicity gainers. One of her first assignments was to fake insanity and gain admittance into the Women's Lunatic Asylum on Blackwell Island. She spent a night practicing deranged faces in the mirror, and once she had mastered being crazy, she went public. Eventually, she was put in the care of a psychologist, who then transferred her to Blackwell Island. The conditions on the island were awful. The food was rotten or unedible, the patients were forced to sit in the cold for hours with nothing to do, and the dangerous patients were tied together with ropes. After 10 days of living in this torture, Nellie Bly was pulled out of the asylum by Joseph Pulitzer. The New York World exposed the deplorable acts of the insane asylums, leading to a national reform for these institutions. Another stunt that Nellie pulled was traveling around the world in 72 days. Pulitzer sponsored the whole affair, arranging for a private train, and when Bly's original one ran behind schedule. The preparation, duration, and time after Bly's circumnavigation increased circulation exponentially. She later retired from the New York World, married a multimillionaire, but sadly died at a young age. However, back to the New York World. The New York World remained one of the biggest circulation newspapers in the country. Publicity, publicity, publicity is the greatest moral factor and force in our public life, said Joseph Pulitzer. The New York World was virtually unchallenged, but Joseph Pulitzer wasn't ready for his biggest enemy yet. William Randolph Hearst. William Randolph Hearst was the son of a very wealthy man. He had owned the San Francisco Examiner, but he later moved to New York after selling that paper. He actually worked for Pulitzer for a small stretch of time, but he eventually bought another newspaper, the New York Journal. Hearst wanted to be the top, and this meant he had to blow Pulitzer out of the competition. Eventually, it was pretty much only Hearst and Pulitzer at the top of the press food chain. One of the techniques that Pulitzer used to increase circulation was the Yellow Kid. A cartoon boy with a yellow nightshirt, this character was able to expose the sad nature of the slums that many immigrants were forced into, in places such as Packingtown and other slums near Chicago and New York City. The character's bald head represented the many immigrants who had lice and had to shave their heads. His yellow nightshirt is clearly an old hand-me-down. The addition of this character to Pulitzer's newspaper enabled it to appeal to both rich and poor. Hearst wasn't going to be beaten by a comic, though, and offered a massive amount of money to draw the cartoonist to his own newspaper. He did so, but the publicity of the Yellow Kid did not even come near to the publicity the paper gained when the Cubans revolted against the Spanish. Cuba had been under Spanish rule since the conquest back in the 1500s, and the Cubans had had enough. Since Cuba was so close to America, many Americans opted that the U.S. declare war and force Spain out of the picture. The sinking of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor provided the very publicity that Pulitzer and Hearst were scavenging for to ignite the fire that would start the Spanish-American War. Using huge font and massive, massive pictures, they blamed Spain for the sunken battleship. The response was incomprehensible. America became outraged at Spain, and eventually the newspapers caused Congress to pass a war resolution. However, the war resolution wasn't the only outcome of the newspaper wars. Pulitzer and Hearst had coined a new, infamous technique of journalism: yellow journalism. Yellow journalism is to grossly exaggerate events in order to gain publicity, and it's still used by many newspapers today. The newspaper battle between Hearst and Pulitzer still raged on. Hearst ran for governor of New York and had a strong chance until Pulitzer put his force behind Republican Charles Evan Hughes. With his ideals and Pulitzer's fundings, Hughes won as governor. Pulitzer had won a battle, but their business war was taking a toll. Pulitzer's eyesight became even worse, and after lapsing into depression, he developed a condition that made him extremely sensitive to noise. He had to move from his newspaper office into a soundproof yacht, but was still extremely active in the New York World, what it printed, and he always sought to expose corruption. One of his biggest, most controversial finds was a $40 million fraudulent payment given from the U.S. government to the French Panama Canal Company. The New York World exposed this scandal to America, and America was enraged. President Theodore Roosevelt and J.P. Morgan were labeled as criminals by Pulitzer, and the court charged him with criminally libeling the president. The court case was extremely controversial. The fate of one of the most important rights, freedom of the press, lay in the hands of the Supreme Court. However, in the end, the charges were dismissed. Thankfully, the freedom of the press had been preserved, and Joseph Pulitzer, although he tested it, had also affirmed that right. When asked about this case, Joseph said, "Our republic and its press will rise or fall together." Sadly, though, this was one of the last battles that Pulitzer would fight. On October 29, 1911, Joseph Pulitzer died from heart disease while aboard his yacht. However, his legacy still lives on. In his will, Pulitzer funded a journalism school for Columbia University and provided funds necessary for the Pulitzer Prizes, annual prizes given for literature, music, drama, and journalism. They are able to embody the human spirit, they expose corruption, and they are able to invoke emotions that we know as purely human. Joseph Pulitzer also proved that through hard work, immigrants can build themselves a new, solid life in America. The freedom of the press and journalism as we know it today owes a whole lot to Joseph Pulitzer.